Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So if we could interview the Good Samaritan and ask him what his why or purpose was, I wonder what he would say. Would he say that his purpose was to be a good neighbor? Or maybe he saw himself as a helper. Or perhaps his why was to combat robberies and make the roads safer. Or maybe he saw himself as an advocate for the common good of all people. There are a lot of different reasons why the Good Samaritan might have done what he did. But what I really want us to notice today is that whatever his why was, he was willing to stick to it, even when it got hard. Whatever his why was, he was willing to follow that call and not let anything deter him, even when it required helping a man who was on the other side of the political and social, religious, and ethnic spectrum from him. The Good Samaritan stuck with his purpose by showing love to this man on the side of the road, even though this man was very different from him. And for those first listeners to Jesus' parable, this would really have been a great shock. Because for them, the word good and the word Samaritan were not supposed to go together. In fact, the division between the Jews and the Samaritans goes all the way back to King Solomon, some 1,000 years before Jesus was even born. As the Bible tells us, King Solomon was a very successful king who created the wealthiest and the most powerful central government the Hebrews would ever see. But this growth was not without cost. To support the rise of Solomon's kingdom, many people in the north were sent into forced labor. And when Solomon died, the 10 northern tribes refused to submit to his son Rehoboam and revolted. And this revolt caused the split between the northern and the southern kingdoms. In the north, we have Israel, and in the south, we have Judah. And these two kingdoms would remain separate for 200 years until the northern kingdom, whose capital was Samaria, by the way, was conquered by the Assyrians. And from this point on, the people of Samaria would forever become mixed and assimilated into the ways of the Assyrians, becoming a mixed people of half Jewish and half Gentile descent who adopted religious and cultural practices from both Israel and Assyria. And this mixing led to both political and religious tensions between the two groups. For example, when the Jewish people of the southern kingdom began to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile, they experienced some hostility from the people living in the region of Samaria, because the Samaritans believed that their sanctuary at Mount Gerizim was the rightful place of worship. And in 165 BCE, when the Jews rebelled against the Greeks, the Samaritans did not help them, leading to more resentment between the groups. And finally, the Samaritans called themselves the Shomrin, guardians of the law, and they only accepted their version of the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible. In other words, the Samaritans and the Jews had many deep-seated political, cultural, religious, and ethnic differences that had existed for generations. Yet in Jesus' parable, it is the Samaritan who stops to help the Jewish man on the side of the road. It is the Samaritan, a man whose people revolted against the southern kingdom, whose people thought their sanctuary at Mount Gerizim was the rightful place of worship, who would have nothing to do with the Jewish people and their revolts. It was this man who stopped to help the one person on the side of the road that he could have ignored. It is the Samaritan who, rather than crossing over to the other side like the priest and the Levite do, follows his purpose to help this man, even when it required him to cross some political and religious boundaries. In other words, it is the Samaritan who does the right thing, even when it's hard. It's the Samaritan who gets his hands dirty, even when he could have been justified in ignoring this man. It is the Samaritan who follows his why, who follows his purpose no matter the cost. And in doing so, teaches us that to follow in God's footsteps, to follow God's commandment to love our neighbor, is sometimes not easy. But it is the way to a life lived forever in God. Park Hill United Methodist Church in Denver, Colorado, has a similar story to that of the Good Samaritan. Partnering with the Colorado Village Collaborative, Park Hill UMC felt God calling them to open a safe outdoor space in their church parking lot. Safe outdoor spaces, which you see pictured here, are healthy, secure, staffed, and resourced environments that provide an outdoor, individualized sheltering option for people experiencing homelessness. Safe outdoor spaces provide an alternative to traditional shelters and provide a space for people who want to continue living outside to have a safe place to stay. And when asked why Park Hill was hosting this safe outdoor space, Steve Holtz Russell, their mission coordinator, said, "I don't know how to be a Christian and not be involved in things like this. I wish it wasn't as unique as it is." Park Hill, like the Good Samaritan, chose to follow God's call to love their neighbor right in their midst. However, not all of Park Hill's residents were supportive of this plan. In fact, 5 homeowners who lived near the church actually followed a lawsuit against Park Hill UMC and their pastor, Nathan Adams, for hosting the outdoor space, arguing that it wasn't safe for it to be located in their neighborhood. Yet despite this, Park Hill UMC and the Colorado Village Collaborative did not let the lawsuit prevent them from sticking to their call. Instead, they wrote, "Regardless of their intention, the plaintiffs have not deterred us. Instead, the plaintiffs have lit a fire underneath us, and we are here to ensure that that fire does not grow into an untamed flame that would burn our progress to the ground, but rather that that flame grows into a sacred sort of fire that gathers together community to be made safe, warm, and whole." Eventually, the lawsuit was dropped, and the safe outdoor space was allowed to continue for the original agreed-upon lease of 6 months. And in that time, Park Hill continued to follow God's call to love their neighbor, to follow their purpose, to get their hands dirty in loving their neighbor. However, even though the outdoor space has now moved on to their next location, Pastor Nathan Adams just shared this past week that some people in the neighborhood are still booing and yelling and cursing at him and church members when they see them outside the church. In fact, this just happened to him again this past Friday morning. Park Hill, their pastor, and their church members have indeed paid a high price for loving their neighbor. They've paid a high price for sticking to their purpose, for sticking to their call to love their neighbor. Yet even though it has cost them, and even though it has been difficult, Park Hill continues to not let anything deter them from God's call. Because they, like the Good Samaritan, know that following God's purpose of love and justice is the way to a life lived forever in God. Yes, following God's purpose, following God's why, and sticking to it, even when it is hard, is the way to a life lived forever in God. And so we return now to our church, to our community. What is God calling us to do here on the corner of 2nd and 2nd? What is our unique purpose and our unique call to get our hands dirty? And are we willing to stick to it? Are we willing to stick with our purpose and follow God's call even when it might be hard or even when it might cost us? Because I imagine that whatever our why might be, whatever it is that God is calling us to, if it is truly in line with the ways of Jesus, then we too might find ourselves in the position of the Good Samaritan, or in the position of Park Hill UMC, having to stick to it, even when it's hard, and even when it requires us to cross some political and social boundaries. Because this is often what is required to truly love our neighbor and follow God's call in the way that God asks us to. Yes, sometimes it is hard and costly to stick with God's purpose. But when we are willing to follow God's call, even when it's hard, and when we are willing to extend mercy to those around us, even when they are on the other side of the political and social spectrum from us, and when we are willing to follow our why, no matter the cost, to love our neighbor as Jesus commanded, then I believe that we too will find our way to a life lived forever in God. Therefore, as we continue on this journey of finding our why, may we not be deterred by the threat of robbers on the road. And may we not be deterred by generations of division and resentment. And may we not be deterred by political or religious or ethnic or social boundaries. But may we follow the purpose that God has placed on us. And may we stick to it, even when it is difficult. For as the Good Samaritan reminds us, staying true to our call may not always be easy. But when we are showing love to our neighbors, we too will find our way to a life lived forever in God. May it be so. Amen. And so now it is your turn to hear from you. We have been gathering your thoughts on this question, why, over the past few weeks. And on the first week, we heard from you why you are here. And one of the reasons that you are here is because of this word inclusive. Some things that people shared is that they felt accepted here, they felt welcomed. One person said, "This is a place where my kids will be loved for who they are." And so today, as we go deeper with this word, deeper with this why, we actually have two questions to answer. The first is, what human needs does inclusivity meet? So what human needs are we meeting by being a welcoming and inclusive space? But I also want to ask this week and next week, who in Salt Lake needs to know that they are accepted and included? What specific groups of people can you think of who might be right outside our doors, who might be in our surrounding community, who need a place like First United Methodist Church? And so hopefully you got an index card when you came in and you can write your answers. If not, you can get one. If you're online, we invite you to put your answers in the comments so that we can continue this discernment process together as we find our unique why. So I invite you to reflect on this question as we listen to our music for reflection today.